The myth of Iphigenia is kind of a classic in the Greek myths. It doesn't usually stand alone as its own kind of story. It's part of a bigger kind of sequence of events. It is the preliminary. It's like the event that sets off the Trojan War, or not sets off, but it allows the Greeks to leave the shores of Greece to go to Troy to fight the Trojans. So a little bit of backstory on this. Iphigenia is the daughter of Agamemnon, who is the leader. He's a very, very powerful king of the city-states in Greece. Greece at that time was made up of a bunch of different city-states with a bunch of just warring. There was no like collective Greek nation necessarily. A lot of the times the Greeks of the different city-states did not actually consider themselves, they considered themselves the true Greeks, and the other city-states were just, kind of warring tribes kind of thing. But Agamemnon was a very, very powerful king and of Argos, which was the city-state that he was in charge of. Something that he ran into was that his brother, Menelaus, they were having this big feast because Menelaus was getting married to Helen of Troy. Helen, she wasn't of Troy yet. But he was getting married to Helen, who is said to be the most beautiful woman who had ever lived, most beautiful mortal woman who had ever lived. And so they were having this, this massive feast for her in her honor, and the Trojans were coming to celebrate. It was part of their kind of like celebration with the Greeks as like a peace treaty. They had started doing trade, and so they had come to this wedding to celebrate. And Paris of Troy, he was like a prince. Basically, he was the son of the king of Troy, and he falls in love with Helen. And Helen, it's unclear in the myths. Helen isn't given a lot of a lot of dialogue. It's pretty much just Paris was in love with Helen, and she either willingly or not so willingly went with Paris back to Troy, literally on the same night that the wedding had happened, that the celebration had happened. And so because of this, this sets off a major chain of events where, obviously Menelaus, Helen's husband, is very, very upset. He he's trying to convince people to we have to go to Troy to get Helen back. This is like the greatest thievery of all time, basically. And so Agamemnon thrilled because this guy's a conqueror. He has sought out to conquer all of these different nations in Greece, and he hates Troy. And one of the things that they talk about in the original myth is that he is both like a politician, but he's also a warlord. Yes, he wants to be on good terms with people, but he's also willing to take things by force. And so the movie that I had watched for this film is called Iphigenia. It's 1977. It's actually in Greek, which is actually something really cool that I hadn't realized when I first found the movie. But it's in the original Greek, done by Greek, all Greek actors. So that's a pretty cool. You kind of have a really good sense of wow, this is actually very closely related to the language that they were speaking at the time of these actual events. So fast forward, Agamemnon's yes, we want to take over Troy. This gives all of these other city-states who have vendettas against Troy because they want their gold, essentially, this is an excuse for us to all go over to Troy. But the problem is that he has to unite all these city-states. And so he spends, an extensive amount of time going and convincing these different groups, conquering some of them, leveraging them to form under one nation under him, to go pursue this war effort. It's not it's not a solid thing. They're not all loving Agamemnon. It's a very kind of disparate kind of group of people, and so it's always on the edge of losing control of all this massive thousands and thousands of Greeks. And so they get all the way, they get organized, they get all the way to the coast of Greece, to Aulis, which is a place on Greece's coast, on their east coast. And they don't have wind. And the reason for this, they can't sail. They can't set sail to go over to Troy. The reason for this is because Agamemnon, on one of his hunts, when they were going into the forest and raiding people's homes around Aulis and hunting for food, he killed a deer, a sacred deer that was sacred to Artemis. And so Artemis is a goddess. She is, she's one of the goddess of the main goddesses of the Greek pantheon. And so she's really upset, obviously. And so what happens is she makes the wind not blow, and so that the fleet is stuck at the port, and they can't get out of the port to go to Troy. So as I said, this group of people, this group of warriors is disparate, and they want gold. They want to do it now. And so they're stuck there for weeks and weeks, week after week. And so the problem becomes, how are they going to, the wind is just not coming, and it's because of Artemis. And so Agamemnon seeks the advice of his friend, or not his friend, I guess, but Colchis, who is his augur. An augur is a person who beseeches the gods, who's kind of the speaker. It's kind of like a Greek, it's almost like a priest, sort of, but they do like readings of like entrails, animal entrails. They do sacrifices, etc. And so he seeks his advice, and he says, you have to make a sacrifice to Artemis. And Agamemnon's like, okay, great, cool. Yeah, I can make a sacrifice. That's fine. But then he's like, you have to sacrifice your eldest daughter, Iphigenia. One thing to note here too is that Iphigenia in the Greek, in the movie, they pronounce it Iphigenia. I'm going to defer to them because they are Greek, so they would know. But they say Iphigenia. And so Agamemnon has to slaughter his daughter Iphigenia at the altar to be able to make the winds blow, to be able to take his army to Greece, or to Troy. And so it becomes this horrible choice for Agamemnon. For most people, right, like this choice would not be a choice. Like, you're just not going to go ahead and kill your daughter. For Agamemnon, though, this guy is, one of the most ambitious people in the kind of the classical world at that time. And so he is like going back and forth, and you see his agony kind of throughout both the original myth and the film. And so I just wanted to read something from the original myth, because the original myth is actually called The Sacrifice of Iphigenia at Aulis by Euripides. It's a play. It was never totally finished, but we have some excerpts here. So one of the things that the play does is it has this chorus, which is what they used to do in Greek theater, where they had like a bunch of different people all speaking all at once, like a chorus, right? And so this is something that really came across in the movie. So I wanted to read a bit of their dialogue. So, to the sandy beach of sea-coast Aulis I came after a voyage through the tides of Euripus, leaving Chalcis on its narrow firth, my city which feedeth the waters of far-famed Aristheus near the sea, that I might behold the army of the Achaeans and the ships rowed by those godlike heroes. For our husbands tell us that fair-haired Menelaus and high-born Agamemnon are leading them to Troy on 1,000 ships in quest of the lady Helen, whom herdsman Paris carried off from the banks of reedy Euripides, his guerdon from Aphrodite, when the queen of Cyprus entered beauty's lists with Hera and Pallas at the gushing fount. So obviously, like, this language is very old, right? But essentially what they're saying is that you have all of these wives and sisters and mothers of these warriors, these young Greek youth who are being called to arms to go over to avenge and to take back Helen. And so this is something that really, really comes across in the film. You have just like all of these women who are weeping, and you also have the hordes and hordes of these men stuck on the beach. And so one thing that was surprising to me, and that I did not expect, was that you see all these massive, massive shots in the film of this enormous cast of warriors stuck on the beach at Aulis, and it's like they wanted to make it true to the times. And so it's just all of these men who are just naked on the beach because it's super hot. There's no wind. They're stuck out in the sun. And so they're just like milling around, literally just doing nothing. And so I thought overall the film was like very, very accurate in kind of painting some of that stuff. So the end. So how this kind of story ends is that Agamemnon has to choose whether or not to sacrifice his daughter. And the film does a really great job keeping to the original story of showing the arc of his being like, wow, I'm actually going to do this. Like he decides, you see him slowly like turn and being like, no, I can't let these people down, sort of thing. It's also like, you can't let him down, or is it like you just want power and you just want to go and take the gold of Troy? And so it shows him just like torn and torn and torn. And then Iphigenia realizes what's going to happen. She's like, oh shit. Like this is the reality. Like I am, all of these people, all of these warriors on the beach, thousands and thousands of men, all want me to die, because the word gets out from Agamemnon's tent. He's overheard. And so all of these men want her to die, to be able to go and avenge and do basically the greatest war that the Greeks have ever engaged in. And so she, on her own, decides that she's going to basically volunteer for the sacrifice. And so there's a little bit of a clip here of her, what she says at the end of the film and at the end of the actual original myth. And she says, it says, "But the maid, standing close by him that begot her, spake on this wise, quote, O my father, here am I to do thy bidding. Freely I offer this body of mine for my country and all Hellas, that ye may lead me to the altar of the goddess and sacrifice me, since this is heaven's ordinance. Good luck be yours for any help that I afford. And may ye obtain the victor's gift and come again to the land of your fathers. So then let none of the Argives lay hands on me, for I will bravely yield my neck without a word." And so the film is just like incredibly accurate. They use like original dialogue from the actual play in this. And so it's just a beautiful kind of story that's like super, super messed up. But it's one of my favorites. So this has been another episode. This is kind of the first episode talking about Iphigenia. If you want to explore this film, I would heavily encourage it. It's a beautiful film. It is, again, called Iphigenia, made in 1977 in Greece. You can access it on Amazon Prime, or you can also access it on Vudu. Excellent. Our episode next week will focus on Troy and the Trojan War. Our episode next week will focus on the Trojan War.